Here we are, Scott. So I leave the word to you. You know, guys, you have exactly 55 minutes to end this amazing panel. Your words, man. Go ahead.
All right, Enzo, thank you very much. First of all, what I'd like to do really is just to introduce the panel. We've got a super exciting panel today. And so the first person I'd like to introduce is Olga Sommer. Olga is Director of Revenue at the Nobu in Portman Square in London. So very excited about your perspective, Olga. But tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do there and why you're joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. It's great to be on a panel. I'm super excited to be in your company. Scott, you're absolutely legendary, and everyone who created this series of revenue episodes, I think, is a fantastic job. So well done. So my name is Olga. I'm Director of Revenue at newly opened Nobu Portman Square Hotel in London. It was quite an interesting experience opening hotel during the pandemic. It's definitely, it's been really an eye-opener. And I've been in this industry for 20 years, out of which 10 is in revenue, was spent in revenue management. So this topic today is very close to my heart because I think revenue management is nothing but thinking about profitability. So it's a big part of it, what we do.
Absolutely, thanks. So definitely looking forward to getting your perspective. I'm just going to go around clockwise if it's okay. It's kind of a weird reunion for me today. Both versions of my professional past are represented. But first, let me introduce Maggie Chen. Maggie and I actually had the pleasure of teaching together at EHL for several years. Maggie's still at EHL, absolutely one of the experts in distribution, and absolutely a fantastic teacher as well. So Maggie, tell us. I've told everybody everything about you already, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Scott. It is really nice to reunion with Scott this way. And I'm an assistant professor at École Hôtelière de Lausanne. And as Scott said, basically for me, distribution is one of my research topics. I am passionate to know how to help hoteliers. And I participate in different kind of conferences, but it is an honor to be here to share my observation with all these practitioners. And I also hope I can hear from the industry about what we want to do with customer acquisition cost.
Thanks, Maggie. And now I'm going to roll the time machine back ever so slightly further and welcome Raul Moranta. Raul and I had the benefit or the pleasure of working together some time ago at Hershaw Hospitality in the United States. And now Raul is Chief Commercial Officer of Remington Hospitality, one of the largest third-party managers in the United States. Really, really interesting perspective, Raul. I'm really excited you're here. And tell us a little bit about yourself. I think you might be muted.
There you go. Of course.
There you go.
It is COVID time, so we are all muted. But very happy to be here. Obviously, we've worked together, so we've known each other for some time. I think I might be the only person in the panel that is not in, or at least is in the U.S. But hopefully I'll bring the U.S. perspective into the panel. I've joined Remington as a Chief Commercial Officer in December. So it's been an interesting experience to try to figure out how we ramp up and grow revenues in obviously a depressed revenue environment. So, but very excited to be here. We have, I am based out of Dallas, Texas. We have about 80 hotels in continental US. So we have hotels in the United States, and then we have one hotel in Alaska. So mostly branded. We do have about 12 independent hotels, which, as you know, distribution and cost of distribution for independent hotels is very different on the branded environment. But very happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Thanks, Ro. We're definitely looking forward to having your sort of large portfolio perspective. I think it'll be very interesting as we move forward. So let me just kind of throw it out there. This is all about distribution cost. I think that even before COVID, we kind of had come to the conclusion that there wasn't a whole lot of profitability left in terms of cutting costs. We don't control taxes. We don't control insurance. We don't control all these things. And yet there's all this money being spent on distribution. And I think another friend of ours, another friend of the show, Max Starkov, kind of described it at one point as the last frontier. So what I'd like to do, for those that know the format, we kind of base our discussion on some of the posts from the Hospitality Net Revenue Optimization panel. So I'm going to go right to Max's post, and I'm just going to read the first line, and then I'm going to ask a couple of people to comment about it. And that was that he said we need to start treating direct online distribution costs as distribution costs. So I know we all have some passion about that, but let me, Maggie, let me ask you first. First of all, what does he mean for people that don't have quite as much of an understanding of it?
Well, for me, I feel like, we need to differentiate distribution cost and customer acquisition cost. Distribution costs are related to OTA commissions, okay, the discounts you offer to tour operators. But on the other hand, there are many other costs which are not considered by me as distribution cost. So for example, earlier, Raul mentioned about he has a branded hotel and independent hotel. For branded hotel, you have brand charges, right? And whether you are branded or independent, you have sales and marketing related expenses. You have CRS fees. You have GDS fees. And all these are considered by me as the customer acquisition cost. But we should say it this way: cost of customer acquisition cost is bigger than the distribution cost. And when we really want to think about profitability, we cannot just think about the distribution cost, the commissions. We need to have the holistic view of all other expenses related. That's how I see it.
Perfect. So Olga, I'm just going to ask you kind of as a follow-up. You were another person that when we talked about all these, this was one of the posts that you zeroed in on as well. What's your take on it? How do we need to start looking at this cost thing?
Yeah, I actually look at exactly the same as Maggie. At the end of the day, you need to put all your costs together. What owners want to know: how much revenue did we make in a period of time? How much did it cost us? And what is left at the end of it, right? So, and in some like franchise or charges might be quite chunky, So when we're talking about the cost, for me, that's all marketing activities, whether they are using external companies or internal, all the kind of what everything you have on P&L, everything that goes into marketing. So for me, I also see it as customer acquisition costs, so all together, and very often you can't necessarily always differentiate it. So I think it's easier to track it this way as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point. So, and Raul, I want to ask you the same question. First of all, very general in that sense, but also if you wouldn't mind, I think Olga just mentioned a really interesting point, which is tracking. And so you have the biggest portfolio, therefore you're the one playing find the numbers the most probably. So talk a little bit about how do we find it all? Because it's obviously not all sitting in the same place too. So.
Yeah, and I think the issue of tracking has a lot more to do with technology that has to do with distribution. I'll give you an example. You can have, let's say, a Priceline reservation that is connected through the brands through GDS. You can have it through a direct connectivity through a CRS, or you can have it booking through, a direct connectivity. Those are going to have very different costs and have nothing to do with the fact that you want to have an OTA, an opaque reservation. It's just that the distribution channels are very fragmented in terms of technology, and every company has a very different technology platform, which then forces us to have different cost measures. And I think because of that, it is very difficult for us to be able to track all of the expenses at the same time, because they all not all go through the P&L. In the case of margins, those margins go through, they actually happen pre-transaction. So they take their margin out, we get our net revenue, so we never see that. For our side, we have used, probably one of the companies that have done the best job, at least in the US, is Calibri Labs. They have been able to do some calculations and cost calculations outside of your P&L and have some assumed costs that make it a little bit easier for us to calculate that. The other thing you find is that there isn't an industry-wide standardization. We have done a far better job of standardizing market segments than we have done at channel distribution. Because as I said, you can have that an OTA reservation could come via GDS, could come directly to the property on a fax. So because of that, we don't have a generic way to do that. I would also tell you that it's very hard for you to find channel distribution on a P&L, or if you are doing a pro forma or you are doing some sort of due diligence. It's very difficult to find that information for any system. And I think until that happens, until we find it on a P&L or we find a standardized way to do that, it's going to be very difficult to calculate it the right way for all the hotels.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a very good point. So let's dig a little bit into that, if you don't mind, a little bit further. And Maggie, I want to come back to you. So you mentioned all those costs of acquisition. Some of them, they might not be in the same place, but at least we can find them. You can kind of understand what your margin was on every transaction. Boy, based on the way we move our rates, that's a super hard moving ball, but you can kind of figure it out. But some of them are softer than that, even like loyalty costs, right?
Exactly.
How much of that was acquiring the customers? How much of that was because the brand made us give it to them and they would have stayed here anyway? That kind of, how about the softer stuff? How do we deal with those things?
Well, this is the part I want to come back to what Raul said. We all know the uniform system of accounts. They define revenue, they define different expenses, but they don't define customer acquisition cost. So as you mentioned, there are some soft costs like a loyalty fee, like brand charges. There's no definition, right? So in this case, Raul already told us several times, where do you get the information? And who has the information? So the web-related expenses normally are charged to the IT department. And the sales marketing expenses from the brand are for the marketing department. The OTA commissions are in the room department. So you don't have the information in one place. Then there's a delay. The delay of, like Raul told us, there are different ways to get a reservation. When do you receive the bill? When do you book that on the accounting system? So I think this topic is really something we need to have more discussion on. Just like what you mentioned, the soft, how do you define the cost of customer acquisition? And since there's no standard, and since the industry has such a huge diversity, it's very difficult to come up with the conclusion to say that, okay, you are going to calculate by taking A, B, C, D, add them together.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And how about you guys, Olga? Same thing. I mean, are you able to track it? You have a P&L. You have one hotel, so you might be able to turn under every single stone and look for everything, like Raul, who's going to do it with a vacuum cleaner. Are you able? How much? I mean, there's a diminishing return to a certain extent in some of it, right? So how do you balance that?
Yeah, so I worked actually in a hotel group where I was looking 23 hotels, and I can relate to what Raul was saying. It's very different when you have standalone property, because yes, I can look at what was revenue made and look at the P&L, and I do actually look at all of those costs associated and commission, and that's then I can see what is left at the end of the day, kind of, for this set period of time, usually months. But for the bigger chains, it is more trickier because they are tracked differently. That's why I prefer to have them all kind of bundled together. Yes, it may not be precise to one booking exactly, but it gives, percentages. It still gives an idea where we are. And I don't think it's more about seeing the trends rather than having precise, exactly, to T results, because the trends are really important to track. And even right now, are we in a position to drop some of the less profitable channels? I don't think so. But tracking it, keeping kind of in mind where you want to get with it, and I use pace. Pace, I think, is a good kind of indicator. When you're running campaigns, and revenue and marketing should be working really closely and GMs together, because to see the results, you don't see results from each individual campaigns exactly, but over a period of time, you can actually see those trends and pace improving. And that's really the most important. So are we moving into the right direction or not? Or do we need to slightly change our course? So for me, it is kind of slightly bigger picture. And even if we utilizing channels that are possibly less profitable, over time, okay, we will get to where we need to get. That's my kind of, yes, I'm able to see overall the spend on marketing expenses and cost of acquisition.
Thanks, Olga. Raul, you mentioned Colibri Labs. I think that's probably a really good, little free endorsement for Colibri Labs. Obviously, Cindy Estes Green, really one of the thought leaders in the whole distribution thing. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in the original white paper that drove rate parity. Whether you like rate parity or not, it was fun at least. But Cindy Estes Green was really, really heavily involved in that process too. And she's the founder of Colibri. So, I mean, kind of in the context of that information, Raul, how effective do you feel like you are in using all of that to be able to manage your portfolio?
So the best way to describe it is we have Calibri Labs where we feel individual hotels have we have the ability to grow revenues or maximize profitability in each individual hotel. In general, because we have a high number of hotels that are within the Marriott environment or within the Hilton environment, then we do distribution and profitability by those channels, because again, you have all the normalized distribution channels are set up the same way. Or for example, on the independent side, one of the things that we have historically done is that every single one of our independent hotels, it is under one single platform for CRS, PMS, and RMS, which means that what we have done is we have an analytics application. We have Power BI. And what we have been able to do is do what we call a translator, which is we have to take a look at what does the Marriott environment say it is direct channel versus what Hilton says versus one independent hotel. And we have to find translators in order to normalize all the information. So as a portfolio, we are able to make assumptions based on what I call the highest common denominator, which is we probably do it at the master channel. And then again, there's going to be some caveats between, one information and the other. But again, we optimize at the individual level. We have high level discussions at the higher level, because again, getting granular level for full portfolio when you're dealing with probably 4 or 5 different family of brands is very difficult for us to do.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, I want to ask you just kind of a follow-up question about that. You mentioned the brands, and effectively you're trying to control costs, that you're not the person negotiating the contract that's impacting the cost. So, do you feel like that you have less ability to control that in a brand environment? Do you feel like the brand's buying power and its ability to negotiate a better deal makes up for that? I mean, how does that work, brand versus independent?
Yeah, you definitely have. If you have a brand, you will have better margins. There's no doubt about it. As an independent operator, you are going to have obviously a higher cost margins. You do have more flexibility in terms of the programs you can participate or not, but you do. Yeah, I mean, independent hotels always going to run a higher margin. I think that where we have the ability to control cost in terms of brands, it is whether we choose to participate or not to participate in different promotions. Reality is, if you take a look at what happens with the brands in the middle of COVID, is brands have different promotions. In most cases, they allow those promotions to go into an OTA. So they said, we are going to do a save and 15-20% off. The OTAs did a far better job at the distribution and marketing piece of that. So sometimes, for example, if we wanted to participate in a brand promotion, we got a disproportionate amount of increase through an OTA for that promotion as opposed to the brand channel itself. So in a lot of situations, what ended up happening is that we loved it for weekdays, but we are sometimes at capacity on weekends. And then it was a situation where we're not managing the channel, we're managing the day of week for that specific promotion in order to have more or less of that particular channel.
Okay. And so let's just kind of ask you the same thing, really. It's kind of the question of you have some independence, right? You have some benefit of some scale, but also probably a little bit more independence. You probably ride right in that place that we'd all like to be. You kind of halfway in between. How much control do you have? Do you really think in terms of the contracting piece versus the managing piece on an ongoing basis? And where do you think the bigger return is, or is it equal, or how do you think that works?
To a certain degree, yes, we do have control pretty much on what we are participating. There are certain campaigns that are branded, and we're participating in them, and certain but most of the stuff we do independently. So what we do, how we control the channels, and I can definitely relate to what Raul was saying, is that you can see return from OTAs much greater, just because they do certain things better. And that's what I meant earlier by saying, I don't think you can switch off certain channels, maybe not always. If Raul's hotels are in a position to do it now, great. For the UK, it's not yet the position we're in. It's very much about generating revenue. But we do have, I think once we're out of the pandemic, we will go back to a little bit greater control. But because we invested quite heavily in our direct marketing, and we do have quite high costs for the marketing, but we actually see a larger proportion right now of direct business than OTS and any others. So we are kind of seeing the benefits of that.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Whether it is, because we're a 5-star luxury hotel, it might be a slightly different story, because for a budget sector, there is no chance they will have right now investment to get to the same volume of business they can see from online travel agencies. They rely about 60 to 7% is coming from OTAs. How much they need to have an investment to see a return. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't fit everyone.
Gotcha. So you brought up a really interesting point. You talked about kind of brand marketing, which to me is one of the most difficult ones, right? Because there's something involved in that. That's something involved in the transaction. We talk about the number of times, and Maggie, I'm sure you can probably give the most recent statistics, the number of sessions, how many websites do people visit before they book and everything. How do you attribute all that cost? Because every single time they touch us, we're spending an effort marketing, and yet one of the times they touch us, they choose to transact or not. Do we associate everything with that time? How do you deal with the investment in marketing that you just mentioned, Olga? I think I just asked two people that question. So let me say, Maggie, how do we deal with the investment in marketing that Olga just mentioned? That was much better. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I want to say that, first of all, I'm really glad to hear what Olga and Raul mentioned about you need to actually also think when you actually work with a brand. You cannot just assume that you join all the promotion activities, because what Raul said is that, okay, if the brand's promotion is going through OTA, then he probably will pass. So I think that is already, for me, this is something is very important for all the audience to know. So always evaluate, even if it's brand proposal. I think people need to know. And the second thing about what Scott just mentioned, Google published a research which is before COVID, but I think we will see the latest one maybe when we return to normal. But before COVID, Google said that people, on average, it takes people 36 days, goes through 45 touch points to book a room. For us, we think this is ridiculous. But travel is a big decision for many people. If people are going to go to stay at the Olga's Noble Hotel, that's a lifetime event. So I'm not surprised about 36 days and 45 touch points. But then the key question now is, when we calculate the contribution margin by channel, how do you take into consideration that people are jumping from one place to the other, the different touch points? So we talk about we need to have the attribution model. But I think the attribution model, maybe you will be able to keep track of what's going on, how different websites contribute to direct booking. But I think the attribution model may not provide enough information about the contribution made by GDS, OTA, and offline channels. So to answer Scott's question, I think the attribution model is something we need to work on. And when we calculate the profit margin, if we do it by channel, the question is this: how do you recognize all the channel when you consider it takes average people 36 days?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. If you think about that same study, I believe was the one that said that 80% of our travel initiates on mobile, or 85% initiates on mobile, but 80% concludes on desktop. So if you want to track that customer, boy, you've got some pretty sophisticated tracking, because you're chasing them from device to device even. And everything is happening. I'm sure everyone loves all their information on the internet. So I'm sure you're all signing into everything with your personal data, right? And connecting all that stuff so that we can make nice attribution and we can feel good about our marketing. And so, yeah, you're right. I think it's a really, really difficult challenge with that path and all those touch points if we want to be that sophisticated. So let me back up and be a little bit less sophisticated. 5 years ago, anytime you said the word online travel agency, you heard the theme music from Darth Vader coming into Star Wars. Like, it was the worst thing in the world. It was costing us a tremendous amount of money. But I think that thought is evolving. And Raul, you mentioned it. I'm going to ask you to speak about it first. But I think we've at least become sophisticated enough to be able to identify when we're spending 35% margin ourselves to generate business that we're getting from someplace else for 20, and feeling really good about the direct business, but killing the profitability at the same time. So, I mean, Raul, would you say, I mean, even from a big institutional perspective, have we become somewhat channel agnostic in that regard? You mentioned, driving better on your brand promotion on an OTA than on the brand site itself, which I'm sure there's some brand people right now really freaking out when they heard that. But what does that, I mean, how does that cause you to make decisions? It changes things, right?
Well, and again, I think that if you take a look at all the conversations that we've had for the last 5 years, you were looking at years when the industry was in its peak, right? You come out post-COVID. I'll give you a couple of examples. Pre-COVID, our portfolio was probably in the 12% range for OTAs, and it was probably in the 20% range for GDS. GDS right now is producing about 6% of our revenues. OTA in some hotels is 40%, 50%. So you would have zero or very minimal business transient. You would have zero, very minimal group business. So a lot of those channels, a lot of those segments would have probably defaulted into property direct or would have defaulted into GDS. When you're looking at the only channel that is producing is the leisure channel, and that channel happens to be the one that you need to drive more revenues in, there's a cost calculation about what we want to maximize on, but reality is at some point you need to get to break even. And to give you another kind of interesting tidbits of info, in the US, and I know that again I'm speaking to a worldwide audience, but in the US last week, nationwide occupancy for Saturday was 75%. US. That occupancy was regardless whether it's top 25 markets or not. Top 25 markets on a Tuesday was less than 50%. So right now, almost 50% of our revenues are coming in on Friday and Saturday, which are heavily leisure and are heavily OTA driven historically. So when we do our calculations, I think it is, 5 years ago, I would have told you I want to minimize certain channels because I am now dealing with how do I maximize the tip of the spear. When you are trying to figure out what this is the only volume you have, then your calculation about cost changes completely, because now you need to figure out how do I maximize my revenues. And then the other challenge that we're having in the US, believe it or not, that there is the, profit per occupied room. That factor is now changing to profit per clean room. And the reason for that is because people are not thinking about the fact that in the US you have a labor shortage. So sometimes you don't have enough clean rooms in certain dates. And then that also is going to change your calculation as to how do you maximize revenues when you have loss of income because you do not have all rooms available for whatever reason you have. So I think that, again, the pre-COVID timeframe and calculating cost and the calculations we do on the corporate side are very different than the current environment. And I think that they are going to also be very different in 2022 and beyond, because we're probably going to get back to a more normalized environment of revenues and profitability.
Scott, may I add something to
Of course, please
both
do.
of the statements? So Maggie mentioned that point where the customers are jumping from one touch point to another. And I think this is the crucial, is like what hotels do when it happens. Okay, how can we, and there is a great opportunity to drive direct business. There are plenty of things hotels can do better. And some properties already increasing the, seeing the benefits of that direct business, because they invested, they're seeing results now. So there is opportunities for hotel to gain more business and to secure that customer. Now, what Raul has mentioned, I really can relate to that. There's a huge shortage right now of staff in the UK as well. And the businesses have to scale down because they are back, because they're not able to deal with the demand. Now, because right now, as we know, there is right now less business coming from the GDS, is for me, is what hotels do. Have they potentially reduce the expenses on some of the campaigns that would historically go into the GDS, but did they distribute that money into, for example, supporting the in-house reservation centers or call centers? Because if we see increase of direct business, but are we actually looking after that channel? Are we diversifying? Are we quickly reacting to that change of channels or not? So that is just something to mention.
So, Maggie, I think what that's saying to us, it totally makes sense. Yeah. Absolutely. I think what we're learning from that is you and I need to do some research on whether housekeeping is supposed to be included in the distribution costs or not. So let's shift a little bit, and I think we want to talk a little bit about Fabian Bartnick's post, because I think all of us were attracted to a piece of it, and I'm just going to read you a piece of it because I think it's really impactful, and then let's go around and talk about it some more. He said, "Don't get hung up on profitability percentage. In high demand times, cost of acquisition matters. However, in medium and especially low demand periods, when there's no displacement, the profit generating business should be taken to drive profit," right? So we should look at dollars, not percentages. The classic argument that we have, the reason that I always fought with the resident manager, let's sell the presidential suite and close the reservation system then if only percentages matter. So where, can we measure it that way? Is that, what do you guys think? I mean, how do you deal with that? How can we get sophisticated enough to say we should have no more than a 10% distribution cost on this sold out night, but I'm willing to pay 50% for this Sunday night business and like it and be happy about it? How can we get there? So Olga, you were one of the people that tuned in on this one first. How can we get more real? How can we talk about making money and not spending percentages?
No, I have two examples to share. So I always, to the new starters who are joining the company, I always give them an example of, do you sell more edamame beans with 92% profit margin, or sell Wagyu beef with 50% profit margin? It works out you need to sell 500 times more edamame beans to make the same to make the same amount of money. So I absolutely agree with Fabian. At the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter sometimes what occupancy you're running or what is ADR. It's actually what you have left. Are you running as busy fools and not making profit? For me, that is more important than what is actually KPIs. Occasionally, it's good to look at the KPIs, but also depends on the business and what are their goals. And there was a second example that kind of right now escaped my mind. Sorry, a second example came back. Sorry, thank you. I was talking to director of revenue who opened 5-star hotels recently during the pandemic, and they went to quite a drastic measure because they were not getting OTAs or direct business. They didn't have enough exposure in the market yet because they didn't have reviews and for a couple of other reasons. So they went to a drastic measure of selling 2 for the price of 1. Was it most profitable decision? Possibly not, but they reached the goal they were looking to achieve, and now they opened additional chance where they will get the business. So I agree. So it's not necessarily about percentages, but actually you may have different goals to achieve at different times.
Yeah, I used to. We have this argument all the time, and it's really interesting. Just let's go take a look and see how we traditionally price wine. And do we really charge 4 times, or 8 times or 10 times the bottle for a $300 bottle of wine? And then how much of it do we actually sell, right? So, where we should be happy with the margin at some point or another with the dollars because we spend the dollars. And Raul, how about from an institutional perspective? Even when you're talking about sales incentives and some of those things, are you able to, how does a company or how does a hotelier kind of discern between the business I'm willing to pay for because it's incremental and the business that, boy, I can sell that anyway and I don't want to pay that much for it?
Very good question. I think it's all about opportunity. you're trying to maximize revenues, and maximizing revenues, you could be maximizing on high demand and maximizing in low demand. So the calculations are very different. I mean, in general, I couldn't tell you that we have an industry or a company-wide saying we're not going to pay more than X in a generic sense. I think that when you're looking at a leisure destination on a weekend, the calculations could be very different than if you're looking at a select service hotel on a Sunday night. And right now, for example, you know, we talk about the change of distribution in OTA. The reason why you have a lot more OTA distribution now, it is not because we have strategically selected to say we want more OTA and we'll never be able to get back. It is because you have the absence of other business. And I think in the context of that, you have to take a look at every single day on its own and be able to figure out what is it going to take to maximize the revenue and the profitability for that particular day and that particular hotel. The other thing is that, for example, one of the things that struck me about, you know, his comments was that you worry about whether you want incremental profit dollars or incremental profit percentages. That changes the calculation depending on your investment stack. So if you are a single owner and you have to pay your mortgage and you have to figure it out, how do I make the next payment in this environment, you're probably going to be more guided towards, I need whole dollars regardless of how much it's going to cost me, because I may not be at a break-even point. In a high-level environment, 2019 is a very different calculation. But if you are a public company, then likely it is that you are going to be more measured on profit margins. And the margin percentages and the year-over-year changes are going to make a big deal on the calculation, because that may affect your stock price. So when we take a look at, for example, investments for private companies or investments for, you know, single owner hotels, we also have to keep that in consideration, regardless of what our philosophy is, because at the end of the day, we have to be an owner advocate and we have to maximize, as I said, the profit of that hotel and the revenues for that hotel based on the owner's needs and requirements at the time of.
Yeah. Okay. So that was just a very complex point that got added to the pile. Thank you very much. And so now, Maggie, we need to not only research adding the housekeeping costs, but also the equity structure of the hotel when we determine the distribution costs. This is really turning into a very wide-ranging issue. We knew it was big, but we had no idea it was that big.
We will be busy for the next 2-3 years, I think. You know how academia people work. You know, it will take us a long time. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's going to take us years to prove what you just said. But anyway, okay.
Yes.
So I want to shift gears a little bit more. So it's great. Sure. We can find it. We know where the numbers are. That's wonderful. We even can understand that there's a slightly different definition for success based on ownership. And that makes absolute sense. Sometimes that consideration can even make sense based on the labor market and the cost. Sometimes you're better off in some situations than others, right? Just based on other things you don't necessarily control. So let's say we can find it. It's great. We know how to find it. We know what we're supposed to get to. What parts can you actually manage to make a difference? Like what levers can you pull and push to cause something to change? So Meg, let me start with you actually. As you kind of think of that inventory of costs, where's the lowest hanging fruit possibly?
Well, I want to say that this is going to, we come back to this idea, you know, we use so many different kind of technology. So, you know, Raul reminded us about how do you track, right? You want to track the transaction between different system. And then, of course, we have revenue management, sales management, and different software, okay? And what I want to say is this. I don't see the possibility for us to be able to just say that, okay, then we don't do it. And Olga just tell us that how much effort, you know, independent hotel, or, you know, you run a different sales marketing activities. So you don't get lucky. You work hard to get the customer into your hotel. And I just don't see the opportunity to go down, you know. I just hope what we will be able to do is, if we are able to do many successful marketing campaigns, like what Olga is talking about, then our demand will be strong. When our demand is strong, then we will be confident to increase the room rate. Okay, that's how I see it. I don't see many opportunities to reduce the cost, but I hope we will be able to build up enough demand for our products. Then we feel comfortable to increase the room rate. That's how I see it.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you the same question. How do you feel? Do you think I mean, is the bigger opportunity in driving the demand and raising the price? Is the bigger opportunity in becoming more efficient and really understanding the costs? Where does the opportunity lie?
Both, probably.
Okay.
She's a politician.
I wouldn't reduce the cost. I think it's about where do you direct the cost. Okay, so where are you more likely to get right now the business, and focus that attention there, and maybe invest a little bit more into that channel. And then about, in a couple of months' time, something else will be like, okay, well, we have another opportunity that just maximize from that. Something that I'm seeing actually a lot in the UK market, because of probably pent-up demand, the customers actually not that much worried about the cost or the price as such. They're looking for value for money, and that is right now that's where I'm seeing opportunities right now. The price itself, yes, there is reasonable levels, and you need to find your sweet spot where you're selling a good volume. Again, in context of the market conditions and similar hotels. But that value for money proposition, I think, for customers is more interested right now in that rather than what it's actually cost them.
So help us a little bit more what that means in a really more direct, practical sense. Is that, I mean, is it the price point, or is that more packaging and value adding? And what form does that take when you think about it?
Yeah, so for me, it's a packaging and value added. And that's where I'm seeing it's also about creating unique experiences. So you need to constantly bring something. Right now, we are very much focused on domestic market, right? So we don't have any international travel. It's how do you continuously excite the customers? You want to bring some unique experiences, kind of one after another, just to keep that traffic coming in. And yes, packages and value added. That's for me the biggest one, the drivers. And it's not really, I don't think revenue management is about just the bedrooms. I see it as a holistic approach, overall experience and total revenue management. That's why I talk about, okay, what can we do in F&B, if you have a theater or something else. So it's a bigger picture. It's a holistic approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we're seeing a little bit also, and I'm interested to hear all of your thoughts. We're seeing a little bit of a shift in consumer demand away from the point of sale, a little bit more towards thinking about travel. So as soon as you start to package, you start to put together a product that's more of an experience, as you mentioned, it gives you a better opportunity to market it as well. You can get out of that fighting for London hotels at $17 a click or whatever you're paying for currently. And you can get into getting in front of people, even using social media, potentially organically and free. But effectively, you have to sort of change your mindset to start selling that customer's future memory, not the bed and the toilet that they're going to utilize when they're gaining the memory, right? If we get into the commodity business, we're kind of toast, right? And I think the other thing that you mentioned about investment in marketing, we shouldn't neglect the investment that the online travel agencies have made in building that loyalty within the leisure segment, and it's paying off for them too, right? These companies are publicly traded companies. If anyone's curious how much they spend on marketing, you should go check. But it's a much larger percentage than the average hotel, and therefore they're getting a return on that investment as well, for sure. How about you, Raul? Where do you see the low-hanging fruit? I mean, you mentioned it's really kind of one at a time, but if you had to take a look at it institutionally, where does it seem like it pops up the most when you look at it across a portfolio?
Very good. I think that you can control everything. I think you can have the ability to influence everything. And I will give you an example. You can control your cost through either strategic intention or the absence of. I'll give you an example. If you have, and you say, I am going to take and spend $20,000 on SEO, you are going to have more distribution online. If you're going to take and spend $2,000 on Expedia Travel Ads, you will generate more revenues into that channel. Or if you simply say, I am going to stop putting money into those channels, then you're going to, again, change the perception or change the number of reservations you have through that channel just because you remove something out of it. We all know that the most effective channel is direct. So if we were to take those things, and I'm not saying I'm suggesting one or other, I'm saying give you an example. that if I take those funds and I take that and basically hire another sales manager that focuses on SMART, focuses on corporate, focuses on group, you will have more direct distribution. So what we are thinking about here is not that I am going to shut down one channel to another, is that you're going to intentionally focus on one versus another, which is what I believe you can do in called channel displacement. So if I intentionally book more ahead of time through direct channels, whether that would be group, business transient where there is, or any other channel other than OTAs, then I am in fact, again, changing my cost structure. So I think, again, as I said, you can have it through, as I said, as an intentional strategy, or again, as ignoring one channel. And simply it is, well, that is what we are trying to do. We're simply saying right now, the channel that is producing, it is, again, direct channels, property. We've had a lot of, for example, in the US National Guards or nurses and things like that. Because of COVID, we're going to go after that channel. We are seeing now some green shoots coming in on the business transient side as the states start to remove restrictions. And then that is the next focus channel that we are going to go after, because we traditionally have been a very strong midweek corporate and group organization, and we are going to get back to those levels. Until then, again, we are going to do whatever we need to do to make sure that we maximize our revenues in the current environment.
Perfect. Yeah, I actually was going to, you made me think of something when I saw something that ran across the screen at the bottom, and I would like to get everyone's thoughts on this, and that is the whole, once you got it, you can't get it out. You know, once you've got 50% OTA, you can't get it out. And I actually am not a big believer in that. I actually believe that the branded channel, the direct channel, if you're managing it well, they'll pay you more. You're competing in a brand agnostic channel otherwise. So if you can create enough of your own demand that you can raise your prices, effectively you're going to shift your mix, because you're going to be more attractive to that direct customer than you are to the totally brand agnostic one. So effectively you're pricing yourself out of some of that OTA business and you're shifting your mix by yourself. But it comes from creating displacement, quite frankly, because the word we haven't said yet, but we're dancing around, is perishability. And we don't really, it's like we have to take that piece into consideration all the time. And I don't think that, with the exception of potentially when a different metric matters, like a publicly traded environment, I don't think any of us really have the luxury, unless we own the hotel, to decide to make less profit. I mean, it's not really kind of like not what we're supposed to do. That's not why they pay us. So we've got a few minutes left. I want to shift into something ever so slightly differently. Let's now talk about the people that have to do this. So Diego, one of the people that puts this all together, he's actually one of the people that was responsible for the revenue dictionary. He's the chief revenue officer of Palladium Hotels. Many of you know them. But his post for in the panel started out had a great line in it. Could we start talking about becoming a profit manager instead of a revenue manager? So I'm wondering, Olga, go ahead. Let me start with you and tell me what you think. But I'm asking you specifically, do you think it's the same person, or do you think it's somebody else? Do we have the right people in the chair right now to be able to make that shift?
Yeah, I think so. I would like to think so. For me, that was a key phrase when I read it. I was like, yes, that's a key here.
Yeah.
I think many revenue managers moved from being revenue managers to profit management already some time ago. Every single decision we make has impact on the bottom line, and plenty of examples we had. Hotels had to make decisions: are they going to continue being open during the second lockdown, or do they close? And many revenue managers did support GMs with making that decision. Equally, in April, we could open for 5 weeks earlier, operating F&B outlets outside in the terraces. And many hotels, again, looked at what is a break-even point, to build the terraces, to find employees. And some did a really good job on finding that break-even point, and some probably didn't make actually revenue or didn't cover their costs. So I think revenue managers already a long time ago moved into this a little bit more profit management and occasionally asset management, and God knows what else we ask to do. At least able to support GMs and sales and marketing and working together alongside other departments. It's sometimes, as a simple example, working out what is the cost, how much you're making from breakfast sold, Is it worth doing certain activities, or actually it's not the wisest decision? So yeah, I think we have the right people, and it's been a long way towards the point where we're actually supporting with other functionalities rather than just revenue management.
Cool. And Raul, let me kind of follow up with you. You mentioned group. And so group is a really weird one, right? Because we think of group as being direct. Oh, it's wonderful business. I recently did something for a mutual friend of ours, as a matter of fact, with a very large portfolio. And the effectively, if you created a margin with group, or you created a commission based on specifically the direct sales costs associated with the group sales department, they range from single digits to 45% of revenue. So it was like this incredible breadth of, and I said, well, what about this hotel? Well, that person also does these other functions that are not revenue producing. I'm like, oh, great. Now we're in the P&L with all the expenses around it. But how does that come into play when you really start to get outside the box? Is it a new person that's able to do that, or do you think we have it in place?
Great question. I think a lot of it has to do with the specific asset and the complexity of that asset. If you have a hotel that you have 30,000 square feet of meeting space, you have to have group. There's also a factor of incidental spend. A business transient guest probably is less likely to spend as much money as a group guest would, because they would have breakfast, lunch, coffee breaks, and dinner. So you look at it again as a holistic approach to say, I can sell these group and get incremental revenues as part of that process, which I would not get otherwise with any other type of business. The other interesting thing about it is that the industry is kind of there's a bifurcation of what people think about how revenue management is going to be in the future. You either will be a generalist, which means that you would be all things considered revenue, which is what people said total revenue management. If you really think about it, the vast majority of the times, specialization has become the norm. Meaning, you have had either a specialist that is in a full service, big box, 1,000-room hotel, or you have a cluster director revenue that has 10, 12, 15 select service hotels. And if you have a cluster environment, it's very difficult to get to this granular level. And I think that that's one of the reasons why in a big hotel, yes, you can have that director revenue be responsible, in charge, and deal with all these factors. In a cluster environment, you probably are heavily more reliant on technology to help you maximize those channels.
Yeah, I think, if you think about it, there's been an evolution that started out with, you were the revenue manager. You're probably the only person in the hotel with a laptop. So now there's some prices to maintain. So now you're responsible for distribution and digital marketing as well. 20 years later, now it's 50% of the job, right? And I think that in many cases, furloughs have pointed that out to companies, that as they rebuild their organizations, they're rebuilding them with specialists, and not with those internally kind of built by, I don't know, just accumulation of stuff, kind of large positions. I think you make a really awesome point. So Maggie, let me give you the last word, because Enzo's over there. He's got this gong thing that he rings if you run too long. So let me ask you, you and I are in the business of helping people for the future. Do you think this makes this a sexier job as we go forward, or do you think this makes it more difficult?
Well, I think, more dialogue like what we have today will really close the gap between the academia and the industry. I think Scott and I, we really work close with the industry practitioners. And, this is what we want. We want to work with practitioners to build the future together. That's how I see it.
Cool. All right. That seems like the perfect final word for me, Enzo.
Cool, guys. That's great as usual. Always great conversation, great topics, and especially, guys, you did a great job. So I think that the audience still get there, commenting, and they really were strongly engaged with this panel. So the topics, it's very hot. But now, how do you handle all those stuff, guys, without technology? So right now, what we're doing, we are starting 3 presentation from 3 different vendor. The first one will be, let me correct you if I'm wrong. I think the first one is going to be with Union Analytics. Then we have our ideas, revenue solution, and then Infor. And then we close after those 3 presentation with a masterclass with Fornova. But before we start those speeches, guys, quickly, I just want to remind you that in combination with this live series, we also release a huge, I think it's the largest dictionary on revenue management and hospitality. I just want to make sure, guys, you know that, and you find out more by downloading for free this ebook. Let me share the video 1 second and I come back in a bit.